Welcome to the Pillar Podcast, a ministry of Pillar Seminary for contextual leadership. Our goal is to equip listeners to become better readers of Scripture and more skillful leaders in their local churches and ministries. If you would like to learn more about Pillar Seminary and sign up to receive exclusive content from Pillar's faculty, please visit pillarseminary.org.
Hey everybody, I'm Dan, and we are trying our best to get this Pillar podcast thing back up and running. Thanks for joining us. Here with me today, we've got Dr. Beth Currier, Assistant Professor of Hebrew Bible, with us here at Pillar Seminary. And I'm also joined today by Andrew and Joe. Hello. We're missing this round, not with us, Greg and Susie. Susie is on vacation celebrating her recent graduation from Pillar, where we all were together in Omaha early June. Congrats to Susie and so many others who graduated with degrees from Pillar. So before we begin, I should also say, Beth, you did a wonderful workshop on the topic that we'll cover today. And in our next podcast session, we did a workshop partnered together with the Polish Network on the song, and heard a lot of wonderful feedback on that. And so we're going to see if we can get you to distill it down, knowing full well that there's so much more that could be said about this beautiful book in the scriptures, but we'll try to boil things down here today.
We will do our best.
Fingers crossed, as we say. So this is going to be the first of two installments, and we've been given some questions or some prompts by you, and we've tried to distill this down to some talkable things that we could cover in roughly 20 to 25 minutes or so. So we'll see how we do. There were, as we were talking through this already, some correctives that you issued about the way that I even framed the topic of conversation. And the first thing I thought we would cover would be, or the issue that I thought we would deal with, the problem I thought we'd solve would be misunderstandings about how the song has been read or is read. And then you had some things to say, so pushback against even the way that I was phrasing that. Beth, you want to chime in on this?
Yeah, so not a big deal, Dan, but just wanting to stress that these are different ways of reading the song. And so there are so many ways people have approached the song. And interestingly, there was a Jewish scholar in the 10th century who said, he's writing and he says, I actually wrote it down so I can remember. He says, "Know, my brother," so he's writing to someone, "that you will find great differences in interpretation of the Song of Songs." This is 10th century, right? In truth, all these readings differ because the Song of Songs resembles locks to which the keys have been lost, right? So there are just so many details in the songs and in the Song of Songs and different ways of understanding each one of them. So I don't want to say one reading is a mistake or a misunderstanding, but do want to underscore that openness to other ways of reading the song can bring real fruitful results.
So that's a good word. I will say I kind of feel like I'm obligated to ask what Scott would probably ask, and if he were here with us. So we're not going to know how to win today. We're not going to win anything with the best interpretation. It sounds like what you're telling me is we're all on the same team here, and we've got a lot to learn from one another.
I think so. Yeah, absolutely.
Good. So I think maybe we should just start, Andrew, with what you had brought up earlier, kind of frame the conversation that way.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so I think, in my own training, kind of the way that I was taught, so kind of alluding to what Dan was saying, the way I was trained to interpret the Bible was, there is one meaning to a text, and it's our job to kind of, break out the magnifying glass and follow the clues to find out what that one truth for a text is. And what you're saying here is that this is kind of a different way than the majority way of reading this text, or the common way of reading the Song of Songs. And I'm kind of wondering, from my background, there's a voice in the back of my head going, well, who cares if some people are reading it a different way? They're wrong. So maybe you can kind of help us think through why it might be helpful to actually read things from a different slant or different direction.
Yeah. Yeah. So historically with this song, from the earliest periods, we know how people were reading the song. We know that they were reading it as both a story about God's love for people, so that divine human love relationship. We'll call that the allegorical reading. And then the other reading that has been in the minority for the most of history is that this is actually about humans loving each other. So human to human love relationships, and even romantic and relationships of physical intimacy, right? And so for most of the history, that reading was suppressed, reading the song. And the allegorical reading in both Jewish and Christian communities, really from the first century, again, what we know of that people were thinking about as they read the song, and that both of these readings were active, but we do see this active work to suppress the human love relationship reading of the song. But then come the end of the 19th century, things shift. And in the 20th century, especially beginning in the mid 20th century, people really started understanding it more as this has to be about humans loving each other. And for a number of reasons. And one of the main ones is the details of the imagery in the song are so specific and at times explicit, right? In ways that make some of us maybe like, oop, is this really in the Bible? And because of that impulse, that was why that human love relationship reading got sort of sidelined. But now that one actually is the one that's more in the majority. So the first question about reading the song is, are we going to read it as about divine human love or about human love? And then if we decide, well, let's go with the human and human love relationship, then the question becomes, are we reading a story or are we reading a collection of poems? Okay, so that's the second division within the human to human. And then if we take it as a story, we have to decide, is this a story about two characters or is it a story about three characters? And then on the flip side, on the other side, if we're just reading it as a poem to which there is no story, then is it one long poem or is it a series of disconnected poems that have all been plopped together in this one book? So I know I just laid out a lot of interpretive options, but those are the different ways people have.
Well, as a maybe I guess a follow-up to that, then these are still all presumably valid each in their own way, and in some sense, I guess, to get back to Andrew's question, are we just laying out options and then we'll pick the best one here in a minute, or is there still validity to read this as a beautiful depiction of, together with the historical church for many centuries, God's love or Jesus' love for the church?
Because I don't know about you, but the way that I read my Bible, there's no human.
That's not what my Bible says.
There's no human love sex in it. So let's just
We might be getting ahead of ourselves, though. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, I do think some of the readings cancel each other out, right?
Yep.
If it's about two characters, it can't be about three,
yep.
and vice versa.
Yep.
And I actually think the allegorical reading, you can't so there are scholars who say you can do both. But what I would say is I would read it in a naturalistic, humans loving each other way. But rather than think, well, there's also a divine human allegory going on throughout the book, I would say there's this how much more analogy going on, right? So if the song portrays human love as incredibly as it does, then we can stop and say, how much more is God's love for humans? Like if their love is that strong and that amazing, like we read in chapter 8, then man, how much more is God's for us? So the details again sort of make me think the allegorical reading doesn't actually work. But there are some people who still do think it does, and who also would say you can read it that way as well as a story about human love.
So Beth, can we then zero in on this depiction of the song as descriptions of human love and let you kind of zero in or zoom in on some of this and demonstrate it for us and for our listeners?
Yeah, I will do my best. So the if we decide to read it this way, the first thing we have to do is decide, is it about one or two characters? And historically, the two character reading has been dominant, but there is the earliest that I know of that we have evidence for someone reading it as being about three characters is the 12th century. Another Jewish scholar named Ibn Ezra, he did read it as about a shepherd lover, his female love interest being the Shulamite. And we find, I will call this woman a Shulamite because she's called a Shulamite in chapter 6, in verse 13. So I'll call her a Shulamite. She's the woman, but then Solomon being the third character. And on this reading, the three character reading, he's a minor character. He's in the background, and he's actually a negative force in the book, right? He is actually interrupting the love of the Shulamite and the shepherd. That's a three character reading. That's the reading that I adopt and that I think the book compellingly demonstrates. But then the two character reading that most people throughout time have understood in the song, reading it as about human love, is between Solomon, the love between Solomon and one of his many brides. But the fact that there are many brides and even concubines he has is one reason why I think it's I would say unlikely that is the way the song has been written.
So for me, like, I got to be honest, up until I took Hebrew poetry with you, I was using, and I don't want to admit this, I was using Song of Solomon as premarital counseling material.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's the way I understood it, was between Solomon and one of his, probably his most favorite wife or bride or whatever it is.
Right.
And going through this, I was like, oh man, I have done a great disservice to people, because going through class with you, it really opened my eyes to, like, maybe I have interpreted this wrong or read this wrong, or it was instructed to me wrong, and there's something else going on here. And so I just want to take a moment and validate, like, I think it's a really compelling argument that you have for the three character plot line, the storyline that's going on here. And then it's also going to affect how we as church people use it, because I've seen how this book in particular has been almost weaponized in churches and with different pastors or ministries to say, you know, husbands and wives, you need to act this way romantically, sexually, things like that. And, you know, that is not the heart of God, as we've learned. And so I just want to say, like, it was really eye-opening for me to have this presented to me in this way. So thank you for that.
Yeah,
so,
thank you.
Are you saying Solomon's the bad guy? I'm trying to figure that out.
I am. I'm saying Solomon's the bad guy.
Hold it.
Again, that's not how I read my Bible.
Hold it. Before we get to that, I think a pastoral note here would be in order. Joe, the things that you expressed, I think it's just a wonderful thing about the mysterious way the Lord works through His Spirit, through His Word, through His people. He meets us where we are and redeems even our less noble attempts, or even our less helpful attempts to serve Him. So I think we all have stories like that where we are looking back thinking, oh my goodness, I've made a huge mistake, but the Lord works in our mistakes, thankfully. And I think plenty of people got some still really helpful premarital counseling from you and from His scripture. So, okay, back to, is Solomon a bad guy? I just wanted to lean in on that real quick and make sure we acknowledge. But yeah, is Solomon a bad guy?
This is a great place to start. And in fact, I think where you need to start to get to the three character reading. So we have to go outside the Song of Songs to show why this is such a needful place to begin. And that is, we all know that Solomon starts out so well, right? 1 Kings 3, the Lord says, what do you want from me? What can I give you? He asks for an understanding mind so that he can rule his people well, right? So he asks for wisdom. And so this is what we associate with Solomon. He is the wisdom person in the Bible. And Proverbs, of course, verifies that this is how he's seen, as this incredibly wise ruler. And we see that play out in the Solomon section of 1 Kings. But we also see that Solomon has three major unfaithfulnesses in the course of his time as king, right? And for this, we have to jump back to Deuteronomy 17. So we remember in Deuteronomy 17 that Moses says, okay, one day you're going to want kings and you'll have them, but kings need not to amass large amounts of three things. wealth, women, and horses. Or I think the order is horses, women, and wealth in the Deuteronomy 17 passage, right? Instead, they're supposed to make a copy of God's instruction, his Torah, read it, keep it with them all the time so that they don't think of themselves more highly than the other people in their kingdom. So clearly what Solomon gets a ton of, we read about in the Solomon section. Chapter 10, we hear he's got tons of horses, tons of wealth. And Deuteronomy 17 actually also says, and don't go back to Egypt for your horses, right? What do we read in 1 Kings 10? Where does Solomon import horses from? One of the places is Egypt, right? And then 1 Kings 11 is the big deal for the Song of Songs, right? Because here we read that Solomon not only, verse 1 in 1 Kings 11, now Solomon loved many foreign women, along with the daughter of Pharaoh. And so that, I think, even is a specific link back to chapter 3, right? Because chapter 3 in 1 Kings begins telling us that Solomon married Pharaoh's daughter. And then it goes into this wonderful narrative of him asking for wisdom. So it's almost like the author circles back to the beginning here now in chapter 11. He's like, remember, he did marry Pharaoh's daughter, and that was apparently fine. But then he married all of these other women from groups that God said not to marry women from, right? And then verse 3, he had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines. And his wives turned away his heart. When Solomon was old, his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not wholly true to the Lord his God, as was the heart of David. So we know that Solomon does not end well, right? And specifically in his collection of horses, women, and wealth. And so what I think we see in the Song of Songs is not only this celebration of human love and human intimacy, but also a critique of Solomon. Because the stronger and more powerful the love poetry is, the stronger and more scathing the critique of Solomon is. Because the love between the man and woman in the song is totally mutual, is reciprocal, is egalitarian. She actually pursues the man more than he pursues her, right? Solomon's collection of women is totally unmutual, totally one-sided, right? So it's his collection of women that I think it's almost like this is the Lord paying attention to the human toll for one individual in this poetic, beautiful way for one aspect of Solomon's unfaithfulness.
So Beth, are we left to discover this as we read our way through? Does chapter 1 just kind of start out and frame all of this in this way for us? How do we move to discover this in the text?
Yeah, well, let's, if we can, just go into the text and try to make it clear for listeners too. So I have to say, when I look at this book in my Bible, the big title at the top of the first page is the Song of Solomon. That's what my Bible tells me. But the Hebrew title is the
I see what you did there.
What's that?
I see what you did there. That's what my Bible says.
It's true, right? But the title in Hebrew is the Song of Songs, which is, and then it's a question. Is it to Solomon, for Solomon, concerning Solomon, about Solomon? So the grammar in the Hebrew does not make authorship by Solomon the for sure thing it's saying, right? The grammar doesn't for sure communicate that. So it's the Song of Songs.
You're saying in chapter 1, verse 1, even the way that that's translated doesn't necessarily need to be. It's ambiguous. Okay.
Well, what's not ambiguous is that this is saying the title as the Song of Songs, right? Similar to King of Kings, Lord of Lords, Holy of Holies. This is the best song ever, right? But then the which is Solomon's is the part. So my Bible says which is Solomon's, but you could also translate that which is about Solomon, which concerns Solomon, which is for Solomon.
Gotcha.
Yeah, thanks. So that's where we start with the heading. So I would just want to change the title in my Bible. But then what I think we need to do in the song, and this is if we all just for a moment, if we're wondering, could this reading actually be the case? I'm real suspicious. If we could just be open to it, and what I think helps so much reading the song is actually picturing like this scene playing out. And what I think the scene that is sort of the anchor of the song is the Shulamite woman in the harem talking to other women in the harem. So we hear about the daughters of Jerusalem, and people have different ideas about who this group of women
This is
are.
the chorus or the refrain. Is that what you're?
No, but this is just the group of women who were referred to in the Song of Songs as the daughters of Jerusalem. And they're named already in chapter 1, verse 5. But I think setting the scene for the song is we picture the Shulamite. She's in the harem, and she goes back and forth in the song between reveries. So just kind of like thinking about having a reverie about her lover, and then directly addressing the daughters of Jerusalem. So she speaks to them directly, and then she just speaks for them to hear at times as well. And so it's kind of like you've got to be imaginative as you read this and picture this playing out. So when the song opens, she's in a reverie, right? She's thinking of her lover. And so I would actually argue that the Shulamite and the shepherd lover never actually consummate their love. They never are together in the song. The song really makes a point about their separation. And that's like a big deal in the song. So they want to be together. They talk about being together. They think about being together, but they never actually are. And at a number of points in the song, we see that really clearly. And one of them is in chapter 1. So what I always think too, as you listen to them talk to and about one another, always be thinking, where are the lovers and where do they want to be? Okay, so the lovers always want to be outside in these verdant green places where there's vegetation, flowers, all the things, right? Birds singing. So when we get into chapter 1, we hear the Shulamite speaking to her lover in the first verses, and then the first line of verse 4, she says, "Draw me after you, let us run." And then the very next line is, "The king has brought me into his chambers." So all the indoor imagery, I would say, is her reality. Her present reality is she is in the palace, and here she's in the king's chambers. If you jump over then to verse 12, we get this image of the king on his couch, right? And then she says in the next line, so verse 12, while the king was on his couch, so he's often hissing on his couch, my nard. So she's contrasting the king with this perfume in her necklace, right? She has this sachet, and her beloved is to her this sachet of myrrh. And so while she's with the king on his couch, her fragrant perfume is making her think of her beloved who is elsewhere. And I think we get a good indication that he is in fact elsewhere. And she's talking about him and what he's like. He's to me like a cluster of henna blossoms in the vineyards of En Gedi, verse 14. And then jumping down to 16, this is the real kicker, I think. She says, our couch is green. Okay, so the king on his couch in verse 12, and then our couch in verse 16 is green. So they're outside somewhere together, but the king is in his palace on his couch.
Okay, so this, I mean, I guess as you're talking, feel free to chime in, anybody else too, but this is, I think, as you're saying, both a really wonderful celebration of passion and longing and love, humans one for another, and then what presumably will become a far more scathing critique of Solomon as we move through, and then maybe speak in some ways to power and subjugation and the ill uses of this. I mean, it doesn't seem hard to. Yeah. Anyway, that's all for now. But I think I see how this is shaping up from what we've talked about beforehand, what you covered in the workshop, and then what you've said here.
Well, and I have a question. So it's, I mean, I guess the way that you were kind of dividing up these different ways of interpretation, the kind of, I don't know, decision tree, of how we go about approaching this. I'm thinking about what that very first branch, right, of that division, where is this allegorical or is this about human love? What is it that you think historically has made people go in one direction or another? And the reason I'm bringing this up is I think because at Pillar, one of the things that we really focus on is reading the scriptures in their historical, cultural, geographical, ancient context, right? Reading the scriptures as ancient documents with abiding relevance. And so I'm wondering, why is it that we have been missing this? I mean, when you're talking, I feel like it's so obvious. I'm like, yes, of course, like that makes sense. But why are we missing out on this interpretation in the history of the church, maybe and in our churches today?
Yeah, so I do think, and we know, and I forget if I said this before, but we know that throughout history, there was fears about this is too scandalous. Like this is too, and also too focused on this very human, very like fleshly thing, right? Like physical intimacy between men and women. Like, why would that be in the Bible? And so it must be about something spiritual. It must be about something to do with the love God has for people. And again, I think the how much more analogy, we can go there. But one thing that really helped the song was all the discoveries of cognate literatures. So there's a ton of love poetry in other cultures, specifically in Sumerian literature. There's love poetry more than any other group. We see the Egyptians write love poetry, but we also have some snippets in Ugaritic. There's nothing certain in Akkadian, but then also in pre-Islamic Arabic, we have love poems. And in all of these different cultural groups, we actually see focus on the physical description of the loved one, right? So we see these. And so like, well, clearly they're talking about human to human love. And so the song must be doing the same thing. So that helped a lot. But I do think it was initially, and still, people thinking, well, why would we talk about sex in the Bible, basically? But again, I would say this isn't actually about sex.
Yeah.
Right.
So Joe, go ahead.
What I'm getting kind of from you talking about the outdoor imagery, that garden imagery between the Shulamite and her shepherd, like that sounds a lot like Genesis 1 to me. Genesis 1 and 2. Like, is there kind of a riff going on there? Maybe we're playing off of that theme, and like, have you come across anything like that?
Yeah. So one real cool, important way of thinking about the song and what it does for us is it gives this image of redeemed sexuality and that redeemed intimacy between man and woman before Genesis 3, right? And so, so this idea that, they're returning to the garden. So people, kind of do make a big deal of that, like, because they spend so much, or the garden imagery is so prevalent in the song, for sure, that makes people think, we're going back to the beginning, and this is how it should always have been, and maybe never has been in its perfect state. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Joe. That's good.
Hey, we probably need to try and wrap things up here and split.
I have one more question. Can I? All right.
Yeah,
so
ahead.
One thing, since we're talking about chapter 1, I know that there is an issue, an interpretive issue, and you being a Hebrew Bible scholar, I wanted to take this opportunity to talk about chapter 1, verse 5. So when I'm looking in the translation that I'm using, and I'm not going to say which one it is, but it says, "I am dark but very lovely." What do you think about that? Do you have any thoughts on? So to me, it's a contrast. Like, well, even though I'm dark, I'm lovely. What do you think about that? Do you have any thoughts you wanna add there?
Yes, thanks for asking about this. So I do lament that translation because it does, I think, a lot of harm to people reading this and wondering, well, what in the world is wrong with dark skin? And I would say, amen. There is absolutely nothing. And so here we see what she's talking about is the fact that she's been working outside in vineyards. Her skin has gotten dark and tan from the sun. So number one, that's the reference, like the literal image, is her darkness from having been in the sun so much. But the thing is, she's not saying that this is a bad thing. She's saying I'm dark and I'm lovely. Like I'm dark, I'm touched by the sun, and I'm still lovely. And so it's like you just have to think: is the Shulamite in the song ever apologetic or like I'm not good enough, or I'm not this, or I'm not that? Never. Right? So the but is a problem. And in Hebrew, there actually is no difference between the word but and the word and. It's the same word in Hebrew. So we just have to interpret in context, case by case, what the best translation is.
So we could translate that I am dark and lovely, is what you're saying.
Lovely. Yeah, I'm dark and I'm lovely and I'm doing all of these things. And if we could, actually, there's one more really important thing in chapter 1 that I think we need to make clear, and that's in the very next verse. So the reference to the mother's sons who are angry with her. So if you read in chapter 6, verse 6 in chapter 1, my mother's sons were angry with me. They made me keeper of the vineyards, but my own vineyard I haven't kept. And so 2 questions come up here. 1, why are the brothers angry? And 2, what does she mean by her not keeping her own vineyard? And so most people, like the most common reading, is that the brothers are angry that she has not been chaste, right? They're angry that she gave herself to her shepherd lover too soon. And then that reading also says, well, she laments not keeping her vineyard, meaning she laments not keeping her chastity. And she laments that she did give herself too soon. But on the reading that this is actually a critique of Solomon, I would say the brothers are angry because marriage is a negotiation in ancient Israel, right? We see this, Genesis 24, Rebecca and Isaac, Genesis 29 to 31, the saga of the negotiations between Jacob and Laban for Rachel and Leah. So marriage is a negotiation. So I would say they're upset because she fell in love and she decided who she wanted to marry without family sanction, without family approval. So they're mad because they have a bride price that they have in mind that they want to make the most of, right? Well, what are they going to get from this shepherd lover's family, potentially? So that's why I would say they're angry. And what she's lamenting isn't that she's given herself too soon, but she's saying, I haven't been able to keep myself from Solomon's harem. I haven't been able to keep myself from the harem and for my lover, right? So that's what she wants. And her brothers want one thing. Solomon gets what he wants. And the brothers end up too. So that's also key in this reading.
Awesome. So I think this is an appropriate place to pause where we can really just pick up from here for our next round. This has been super helpful, Beth. Really interesting. Appreciate your time and all the wisdom that you bring and are applying to this for us, as you have for all kinds of students that have gone through your classes. So we've got a lot to think about. We'll pick up here next round with really trying to land this on why did God give us the song, and then what should we do about it. So we'll hopefully be able to spend a little more time engaging with the applicational piece of this. What are we going to do about these things that we're learning from you and from the scriptures that you're helping us see a little more clearly? So Beth, thank you so much for your time here. And Andrew and Joe, thanks for your time. Thanks for all of your engagement, your input here. I think that'll just about do it for us here. So, hey, if you like what you hear and you would like to study with us at Pillar Seminary and pursue one of our several different degree options, the Master of Arts or the Master of Divinity, you can find out more by emailing us at admissions@pillarseminary.org for assistance, or you can go straight to our website and get information and apply online, pillarseminary.org/apply. We're flexible, we're affordable, we're an accessible seminary. We meet you where you are. Join us as we reimagine seminary for anyone, anywhere.
Thanks for listening to the Pillar Podcast, a ministry of Pillar Seminary for contextual leadership. Please visit us on the web at pillarseminary.org to find out more about our academic degree programs and non-credit learning opportunities. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, and podcasting platforms. Thanks again for listening.